Hey there neighbors, Kevin here with eTrailer, and today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Dexter Easy Flex suspension kit for tandem axle trailers here in our 2012 Forest River Wildwood X-Lite travel trailer. If you own a travel trailer or even a fifth wheel, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about when I say that the ride quality isn't always the best. Typically when you're out on the road, you're feeling every bump in the road, you're feeling the vibration. Maybe when you're hitting over those rumble strips, it's even worse, 10 times worse going up, traveling through the frame rail into your tow vehicle. And then you also kind of get that chucking feeling. I typically feel that a lot whenever we're driving around on our bumps course, or usually with a fifth wheel, I really feel a lot where it almost is like shifting you back and forth in your seat when you're driving. And what an upgraded equalizer is going to do for you is help eliminate that road shock right here at the wheels, so that way it's not traveling all the way up through the frame rail into the tow vehicle, so that way you're not feeling it and then white knuckle gripping the steering wheel trying to overcorrect and stay on the road nice and safe. So swapping out your equalizer is definitely one of the best ways to upgrade your suspension. Along with that, you're definitely going to want to switch over to some wet bolts, so that way you can properly lubricate your suspension and keep it running for the life of your trailer. All right, so what you see here is our finished product. That's going to be the equalizer along with our new shackle straps and wet bolts. You can see there's grease all over them because we've greased them up. It's going to help protect them, keep them nice and lubricated. But what I really want to show here is just exactly what our equalizer is. So this is going to be two pieces where it's going to be fighting against each other. So as the weight shifts back and forth, it's going to be compressing against this rubber shock that's built into the base of it. So what that's going to do is help kind of push that back, fight that vibration, fight that road shock, fight that chucking, especially with the chucking. So one thing I usually feel when we go over our bump course is a lot of chucking. And with this, I honestly didn't really feel it too bad. This is a lighter trailer though, so I do want to take that into account as well. But overall, that really eliminated that chucking for me. So definitely is a major game changer when you're trying to upgrade that ride quality. But with all that being said, why don't we get in the shop? Let's show you our old setup, and we can kind of go through why you'd want to actually install the system over just that standard equalizer. So looking at our old equalizer, you can see it's pretty much just a big hunk of steel. There's nothing extra about it. There's no cushioning, there's no support, aside from just it being there to help the weight shift between our two axles. So realistically, you're not getting a lot of help when it comes to road shock, vibration. Anytime you're hitting one of those big bumps in the road, it's going to keep fighting back and forth between the two axles, and this isn't going to help dampen it in any way. So if we want to switch over to an upgraded equalizer so that we can get that shock absorption, the first thing we want to do is start taking some measurements. So to determine how we're going to pick out a replacement, what we want to do is match up exactly size-wise what we have. That way we don't throw off the rest of our suspension. If we do end up going with a different sizing, that can change the sizing on our shackle straps as well as our leaf springs, just to make everything sit how it needs to sit, so we have a correct spacing between our two axles. So it's super important that you try to stay as much as you can close to that original sizing to make everything sit correct. So our first measurement is going to be from center to center on our shackle strap bolt holes, which are these side ones. That's our horizontal measurement. And if I just measure from bolt to bolt, looks like we're right around 5 3/4. Now the other half of this is going to be our vertical measurement. So we don't want to go and switch to something where now it's going to add a ton of height and then it has our leaf springs kind of sitting wonky, because then that's going to try and force out the wheels a little bit further. So for our vertical measurement, we will go from the center of our hanger bolt hole down to the center of our two shackle strap bolt holes, which is looking maybe 2 1/8, 2 1/4, roughly. So we want to make sure that we're staying around that. Now I know a lot of the time the upgraded equalizers will have a lot more of a gap there, or will have a hole, which you sometimes see on some of these older unupgraded ones where it starts to kind of wear through. But unlike the MORryde ones, they have a hole that's meant to actually allow for travel, so that way when our suspension compresses and decompresses going over those big bumps, it kind of takes up some of that shock and allows it to just kind of move on its own and force that back down, so that way we're not feeling it up in our tow vehicle. Now for our shackle straps, same deal. We're going to be going from center to center on our bolt holes, and now typically you're going to see ones where it's 2 1/4 or 3 1/8. This one is an outlier where it is sitting right at about 2 5/8, so it's a little bit longer than normal, but not too bad here. We're going to be pretty close to that. We're at 2 1/4 with our shackle strap kit that we have with our equalizer. So aside from measuring, there really isn't much else to this. It's going to be just determining which one is going to fit size-wise, and then from there you can kind of break it up into the other categories of just design. So Typically, I see a lot of people get Moride, but also Dexter is a huge name in the towing industry. They've got a bunch of upgraded equalizers, which are also going to be great for your ride quality, and that's exactly what we're going to be putting on here today. So why don't we show you exactly what the new one is going to look like. All right, so here is a look at our completed installation here. So we have our newer equalizer in place along with our new shackle straps and wet bolts, and just as a comparison, just to show you, I mean, before with our old standard equalizer, like I said, we're not getting any kind of help at all with our suspension. We're not getting any kind of cushioning, so all that vibration that you're feeling is just going to keep traveling up through the frame rail into your tow vehicle. Same thing with our shackle straps, and now you can see, I mean, these are about a third of the thickness of our new Dexter shackle straps, so we don't have to worry about these ones ever having that wobble in them, because it's not going to be able to sit there and eat a huge hole into our shackle strap like it can with these thinner ones, like you'd get just standard with your trailer. So much less play we have with our suspension, which is going to help with any kind of bind ups if we did have a little bit of play somewhere else. So that's super important to make sure that you are checking those regularly. If you are having an issue where you were seeing it was loose, typically what you can do is just kind of come over and grab on it. If you're getting any kind of play out of it, you know something's wrong and you need to start taking it apart and kind of looking at it. Maybe pop one of the bolts out, you'd see, hey, I got a little bit of a oblong hole here now it's time for replacement. Whereas now that we switched over to our Dexter, we shouldn't have to worry about replacement for the life of our trailer. Now, if you feel like replacing your whole suspension or even just the equalizer and shackle straps is going to be too much work for you, or you just don't have all the space to actually get all this done, maybe you live in a neighborhood with an HOA that doesn't want you to have your trailer out in front of your house and you just don't have the space to do it somewhere else, definitely feel free to use our dealer locator. You can enter in your zip code to find a shop near you and get it professionally installed. If you are wanting to do this yourself, then stick around and I'll help walk you through the process. So now that we're on our install, there's a few things that we want to do to prepare ourselves. First, we're going to have to lift up the trailer by the frame so that way we can let our suspension hang, because we are going to need to move it up and down and kind of have it get out of our way a little bit and then bring it back up, which is exactly why I have two bottle jack stands, and those are sitting under my axles so that way I can raise and lower the suspension as I'm swapping everything in and out. Other than that, I'm going to be also using eye protection. You'll want some ear protection as well, because if you do get under here and you start hammering on these bolts, you will definitely hear some ringing in your ears. So definitely pick some of that up, and then we're going to be starting out by removing our suspension bolts. So we're going to need to take off the nuts on each one of these bolts. We'll have 3 for the hangers and then 4 for our shackle straps. Now when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you have a wrench on the bolt head side, because each one of these bolts is going to have splines in them, which on this one I've already ground them down so they're not sticking out, because I use this bolt to hammer in new bushings. But these essentially are going to stick out just a little bit, and they'll bite into the hanger, they'll bite into the shackle strap, and we don't want those to spin inside of our hangers. Shackle straps, not as important because we're going to be replacing them, so with that you can let it rip. But with the hanger ones, we really want to make sure that we are putting a wrench on here, holding that bolt head nice and tight, not allowing it to slip and start chewing up the hanger, because then our bolts are just going to want to keep moving on us, and we're going to eventually get enough wear where it's going to wind up eating through our hanger, and we're going to have to weld on new hangers, and this just becomes a much bigger mess and hassle that we don't want to deal with. So I'm going to get under here and I'm going to pop off the nuts on the hangers as well. Now in our case, we have a little bit of a problem today. We have this right in the way, which is our water tanks. So we've got our fresh water, you can see the drain for it. And then we also have another tank to the side of that. There's also a gas line, a hard gas line right here. So a lot of stuff in the way. We're going to be fighting past all that while we're trying to get our wrenches on, but we should be able to get this off in no time. Now you can see I'm getting a little bit of a fight from the shackle straps just because the axle position here, so we may need to raise or lower it if it's really fighting us to get our shackle straps out, but a lot of the time what you can do is pop the other side first. And I'm going to be using my hammer, just give it a little love tap to get it out. And from there we can also use a punch to pop it the rest of the way. You'll typically need a punch when you're getting to the hangers just because of those splines. Now with our kit, we're going to be using wet bolts from now on, so our nylon bushings are going to need to be removed. So what I like to do personally is just take a big flathead screwdriver and kind of have two ways of doing it, but I typically want to get in just a little bit and I'll kind of pry and smash it. Sometimes they'll want to come with you and you can kind of just keep prying it out and hammering it in on the opposite side, prying it out. Or sometimes what I'll do is I'll hammer it in just like this, get it kind of flipped over on itself, and then I'll set my screwdriver across it, and then I can just hammer the whole thing out. But it really just kind of depends on how easy it wants to move for you. Sometimes the prying out method is a little bit better. There we go. So here's our old bushing. This one's not actually too bad. A lot of the ones I see when we have suspension work come in are typically completely chewed up, whereas this one, if I wouldn't have chewed it up with the screwdriver, it looks like it was still in pretty good shape and could have lasted a little bit longer. So I'm going to continue on with my bushings. I've got my bronze bushing right here, and I've got one of the old bolts that I've popped out from the other side because I've already gotten that one done. And what I did was I took the bolt over to our bench grinder, ground down the splines on here so that way it's not going to start eating into the bushing. Pop that into my bushing, and then I can hammer on that instead of on the bushing itself, because if I tried hammering the bushing in just like this, I'd most likely end up damaging the bushing at some point. So having that to kind of help push it through makes it a little bit easier. And all we do, pop our bolt out, do the same on this other side, and then we can start doing those outer hangers. Of course, this one wants to fight me. A little bit more. All right, so now we get that bolt out, we can use our jack to lower our suspension just enough to get that bushing out. Now this one's going to be a little bit harder because, like I said, I don't have as much really holding me, so I need to be a little bit more careful as I'm hammering this. Because the axle could just pop right off my jack if I'm not too careful. And once again, hammer in our new bushing. Now one thing you could run into, and something I ran into myself, was the other side of the axle wanted to just drop down on me, so I threw another bottle jack over there, lifted that side back up, and my shackle straps back up how they're supposed to be, and that made it a little bit easier because then it's not twisting the axle. So you may end up having to kind of move some stuff around. Having 4 bottle jacks is great. Not everyone's going to have 4 bottle jacks though, so you may need to get a little bit creative. But with that one popped out, we're now going to do the same thing over on the other side, and then that should be it for our bushings. Last thing we'll have to do is pop out our center hanger bolt, and then we can start installing our new components. All right, now I'm fighting out the center hanger bolt. There's our nut. Now we got to get in here. We're definitely gonna have to use a punch just because I've got this in the way, so I can't really get a good whack on it from here. All right, I hammered that center one out enough to where I could just pull it straight out. Now we can just toss our equalizer. Not gonna be using this. Not gonna be using our bolts again since we have all new hardware. So at this point now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually raise these up enough to get the outer hanger bolts in, and then from there we can kind of play around with it and get it set so that way we can get our shackle straps in along with our equalizer. All right, now we're going to do one of our outside hanger bolts, and you can see it's one that's got a shoulder cut into it pretty deep, so it's a smaller thread. You're going to have a flange nut that's going to go along with that, and for the flange nut side you're going to need an 11/16 socket or wrench. On the bolt head side you're going to need a 13/16 socket or wrench to hold it. And along with that we're also going to have to hammer this in. So I have a 9/16 socket that I use for this. Since this has a grease zerk fitting, I can't hammer straight onto the head of the bolt, but if I stick a socket on first, I can then hammer onto the socket. That'll press around our grease zerk fitting and hammer it in so that each one of our splines at the base of our head right here will actually bite into the hanger. Now the other thing with this is we've got a hole in here for the grease to actually come out. I like to put those up towards the top. That way we can hope that gravity kind of helps spread that around. So if it's down at the bottom, it's more likely to just kind of spread out and come outside of our bushing, whereas if it was above, maybe we have a chance of it kind of really spinning around and greasing it properly. So that being said, I'm going to slot my bolt through. So with our bolt in place, we're going to throw on our flange nut on the back, and you can see, it's kind of hard to tell, but essentially what they did was they pressed in on it and it kind of smushed it a little bit, and that also the very first thread is kind of flattened. So it essentially just helps it from backing off once it's on there, but it is a fight getting it on sometimes. So you may have some where it goes on real easy, you may have some where it's just gonna, every thread's gonna wanna fight you, just like it's doing to me right now. Now this is why it's important to make sure that you have that wrench on the bolt head side so you can prevent it from moving, because like I said, we wanna keep our grease zerk fitting facing up. We're just gonna go until this is snug, and then we're just going to start hammering this in, and then the bolt's going to want to move a lot less for us, make it a little bit easier. But sometimes if you don't already have a little bit of pressure onto it, it's not going to want to hammer in, it'll keep vibrating back out on you. Here's where your hearing protection is also going to be needed again. That one went all the way in real nice. Didn't have to fight it. A lot of times I'll have to kind of go back and forth, hammer it a few times, tighten the nut, hammer it a few times, tighten the nut, until we get it fully seated. Once it's like this, I'm just going to go until it's a little snug, and then we can come back with our torque wrench and just finish it off, make sure we have it properly tightened. What you're really wanting to look for though is the nut should fully match up with the shoulder that we have on our bolt. So you can see it's going to go all the way down until it dead ends past the threads there, and it can't go any further. We want it right in right on that, so that way we know we got this at the correct length here, so that way we don't have too much play with our suspension. All right, now we're ready to put our equalizer up on our hanger here, but before we do so, we want to put some of our anti-seize inside of our bushing here, and then also around the outside edge of it. We're going to kind of get that in between so that each one of these arms can kind of flex back and forth. That's the whole point. Our hanger is actually going to pinch down on this inner ring right here, this bushing. As you can see, it sticks out just a bit more than these do. So it's going to clamp down nice and tight on that, and then these two arms are going to be the only thing that actually moves, because they're going to be fighting up against this rubber isolator right here. So we'll rip this off. And I like to put just a little bit on the outside, and then I'll smear it, and you can see I've already got a shop towel ready to go. I'm not going to go too crazy on the outside, because we're going to have a lot of this kind of smear out anyway. And squeeze more onto the inside, and I'm going to use the bolt too. Kind of smear that around inside of there. And once we got a good coating, we'll get that held up in place. And you can see which way this is going to go. One side's going to have the Dexter Easy Flex little sticker button thingy here. That's going to need to face outwards. The other side will not have that. So you can see, instead they have the part number for it stamped into it right here. So with that all lubricated, we can then slot in our bolt. On the back side, we're going to put on our lock nut, and then we're going to hammer this in because once again, this does have some splines. All right, that's fully seated. I'm going to snug this down. This is a pretty big, or somewhat higher torque rating, at least for suspension standards in most cases. So I'm just going to snug this down pretty good, and I'm going to leave that centered as I do it. And you can see I've got a wrench on the bolt head too, preventing that from slipping and tearing that out, since we want our splines to actually stay in there. So now at this point, we can get our shackle straps ready. Once again, a lot of times people want to just go off of the writing on the shackle strap. What I'm looking for is the holes in our wet bolts. I want to have those facing kind of up. So like I said, gravity can kind of help get that grease down lower. Now this is the point where having the bottle jacks is really useful, because I obviously need to move my suspension around to get it lined up perfectly so I can slot these in. So this is where I'm going to have to kind of lower it and play with it just a bit, get it exactly where I need it to be. All right, got it lined up enough. So this one will be upside down, but we care more about the grease, like I said. This one I'm going to need to go up a bit. All right, now on the back side, we're going to have another one of our straps. Slot that on, and then we'll have our locking flange nuts again. We'll put those on. We can snug those down, but we'll come back and torque each one of our bolts to the specifications listed in our instructions. I'm using a 7/8 crow's foot. Now, in most cases, you're not typically going to have the water tanks right up against your suspension. This is the first time I've ever seen it happen that way. So most of the time, you're not going to need a crow's foot. In my case, I am. And then on the bolt head side, I'm going to be using a 13/16 wrench to help hold that in place. Now with everything torqued to spec, it is finally time to grease up our wet bolts. And we were going to have 8 different wet bolts to grease here. We've got our 2 outside hangers, we've got 4 for our shackle straps, and then we have the 2 arms of our equalizer that we need to grease. All right, so what we're looking for is we want grease popping out of the other end. You can see that we're getting grease all the way around, so now we can move on to our next bolt. That's in there. Coming out there. All right, now with our suspension torqued down to spec and lubricated properly with our high temp grease, it's now time to reinstall our wheels. Now we can just get our lug nuts on, get these torqued down to spec. I'm gonna run these down just a little bit, get them snug. We can drop our trailer back down so it's got the weight on there, and then fully torque it so that way the wheel's not trying to spin on me while I'm trying to actually torque it down. Make sure that you are doing it in a star pattern too. That way you're getting nice even pressure on your lug nuts and really pulling that wheel up against the hub face. Well, that's going to do it for our look at and installation of the Dexter Easy Flex suspension kit for tandem axle trailers here on our 2012 Forest River Wildwood X-Lite travel trailer. My name's Kevin, and if you still have some questions about what's going to be the right suspension upgrade for your travel trailer, please feel free to reach out to us via our Ask the Experts link, a comment on this video, or a phone call to our customer service department, and we'd be happy to help you out on your journey.